Houston Real Estate Radio.
Thanks for tuning in to Houston Real Estate Radio this Sunday. I'm here in the RREA.com studio with my co-host, James Brown, and we have Robert Denk calling in to talk about the economy and kind of a future forecast. We are finally through the elections and want to talk about what's going to be here pretty soon here coming in the future. Robert is a senior economist at the National Association of Home Builders. So shed some light on this for us. What do you think?
Well, we think that the economy is sort of slowly but surely getting better. It's been sort of grudging progress, both with GDP growth, overall output, and the labor market. But in both cases, we are sort of recording positive numbers, and we expect that to get stronger as we go through the rest of this year and 2013 and 14, just building momentum.
Well, that's good. Homeowners definitely want to hear that, and home buyers for sure.
Yes.
So you anticipate it to increase and not cool at all, or increase at the same rate?
Well, we expect the fourth quarter and the first quarter of next year could be a little slow, a little sluggish, maybe some give and take there between the quarters. But once we get into the second half of next year and further out, we expect to see just plenty of steady growth and improvement.
Did the election have a big impact on our local housing market? Do you think that, because we had some economists who kind of said, here in Houston things are so stable, it really doesn't matter. The national election just doesn't play a big part in it. And then we talked to other people who say, really, depending on who gets elected, it's going to have an impact on our local housing market as well as the national. What do you think?
Well, I think the first thing to note is that housing is local, and what's really driving the conditions are sort of population and job growth, house prices, in particular these days, the foreclosure rates. So I think the election sort of really is not a big driver in what's going on in local housing markets.
So when you say local, we're here in Houston. Tell us why Houston's doing so well, and what do you see for our immediate future?
Okay. Houston is doing very well. Actually, most of the markets in Texas are doing well. A lot of that is basically because the fundamentals were sound, that while many parts of the country went through a pretty horrific boom and bust cycle, the Texas markets were far more restrained, that there was steady growth rather than a lot of overbuilding, that house prices, instead of the sort of bubble and bursting that we saw in some other markets, were very stable throughout the period. And that results in a very low sort of foreclosure rate. While foreclosure rates have escalated around the country, and particularly in places like Nevada and Florida, Arizona and California, those rates have really moved up. The rates in Texas were much closer to historical norms. So the combination of no overbuilding, stable prices, and the absence of any real foreclosure crisis has meant that Houston and the Texas markets have done actually very well.
Do you have any insight into the foreclosure rates that are coming?
We think that actually the worst is behind us. Nationally, the foreclosure rates peaked in the third quarter of 2009. There's a very different story in different parts of the country. But what we have seen is that rates have come down from those peaks, and in particular, the other factor there is that not only the foreclosure rates, but the delinquency rates, the mortgage holders that are 90 days or more delinquent on their mortgages, those rates have also come down. Think of that as the pipeline into foreclosures. So we've seen both the flow in the foreclosures, but also the feeding in have come down substantially from their peaks. So I think going forward, the rates will remain elevated, but it's clear that the worst is behind us, and we're sort of working through these issues.
Good news.
Yeah, definitely good news. Bob Denk does a lot of forecasting and analysis for the National Association of Home Builders. So tell us where you think interest rates are heading and land value prices.
Oh, well, we think interest rates, the Fed has made pretty clear that they're interested in keeping both short-term and long-term rates very low for the foreseeable future. They've said in their most recent statements that short-term interest rates, they expect to keep their Fed funds rate at the current rock bottom level through mid-2015. So I think that and the quantitative easing, the QE3 that they announced in September, both ends of both the long-term and the short-term interest rates, they're very focused on keeping both of those rates very low, and that's very good for mortgage rates, and that's very good for home buyers and home buying and home construction going forward.
Right. You know, land values, I think, plays a big part in new construction starts for home builders. And as home prices go up, do you think that the land prices are going to continue to go up as well, or do you think, that they're going to stay the same and we're going to see money loosening up and things are going to kind of even out and get better?
Land values are a big component of what goes into house prices. You buy the land under the house, and what we have seen is the prospects there are very promising. What we had seen during the housing boom was a run-up in house prices. During the bust, we saw a collapse in house prices. They've spent the last few years sort of struggling, not moving down a little, but much better than we saw between 2006 and 2009. According to the Case-Shiller House Price Index, the peak-to-trough decline nationally was about a third. Then, over the course of 2009 through most of 11, they probably dropped by another 1 or 2 percentage points. The really promising news here is that since the beginning of this year, they've been moving up pretty steadily, and they've been moving up sort of all around the country. I mentioned earlier that markets in Nevada and Florida, Phoenix, and California, they were some of the hardest hit in the boom and bust cycles. They also had some of the biggest house price bubbles and some of the biggest declines, but we're seeing prices turn around even in those hardest hit markets. So I think that, combined with the national indexes are all moving up, is a very good signal that both house prices and land prices will be moving up and are in more normal fashion, getting back to normal compared to the boom and bust cycle that we've been through.
Robert, tell me this. We have a lot of small-scale builders here in Houston. Is there anything differently that a small-scale builder looks at or needs to be thinking about as far as the future than a larger-scale builder?
Well, I think one of the biggest issues that our members talk about and what affects small builders is the access to credit. We know that the big builders have access to capital markets and Wall Street, and their financing issues are a lot more stable than we find with the smaller builders. The smaller builders tend to be more reliant on their local community banks for funding projects, and that's been sort of a tight spot. We've seen from the Federal Reserve that lending standards have been very tight in the last few years, and they've only recently sort of stabilized or eased a little bit, but they continue to be a problem, and that's going to be a real issue. That's one of the major headwinds that we see in terms of holding back an even more robust housing recovery.
What are your projections for new home starts in 2013 in Texas? Do you have those projections?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
We expect that in Texas, let me just give you a little context. In 2005, sort of the height of the housing boom, but that's actually relatively normal. I said that the housing production in Texas didn't really get over-accelerated during the housing boom, so a fairly normal level of housing starts, single-family housing starts in Texas, is about 175,000 per year. In 2009, sort of at the bottom where everyone crashed, the housing starts in Texas had basically fallen to about 50,000 per year. They're back up now to about 75. We expect by the end of 2013 for housing starts to improve to about 100,000 per year. And actually by the end of next year, by the end of 2014, we expect that they'll be getting closer to 150,000. So that's
good. It's looking better, huh?
Yes, some real improvement. I say that we fell into a pretty deep hole, and lots of areas are making progress climbing out of it. But getting back to normal is going to take more than 2013 and 14. We'll probably be back to nationally to more normal levels of production at about 2016. But I think Texas could be there much earlier, maybe as early as 2015.
And by normal, you mean 2025 levels, 2005 levels?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Good. All right. Well, sounds good. Some great information right here after the election. Kind of wanted to see where you stand on things, how you think things are going. It sounds like pretty good. So that's good. We appreciate the update. And if you have a real estate question for James or myself, you can always call us at 281-882-8088, and we'll be happy to answer that for you. And you can always catch our show at HoustonRealEstateRadio.com if you missed any of the show. I'm Shannon Register.
I'm James Brown.
And we'll be right back.